a significant reporting error has led Treasury to dramatically revise their projections for the Morrison government's JobKeeper program. Treasurer Josh Frydenberg has fired back at critics. This is what he said when I spoke to him a short time ago.
Well, this is good news for Australian taxpayers because, as you say, $60 billion less to be spent than otherwise initially forecast because the economy has not deteriorated as much as Treasury initially thought. You've got the Labor Party out there attacking public servants. That's really just not on. This is an unintentional error by around 1,000 businesses. Nobody's been overpaid, nobody's been underpaid, but the estimate of the number of people who will come under the JobKeeper program is no longer 6.5 million, but around 3.5 million, which means that the cost of the program is not $130 billion, but $70 billion. But Peter, this is all borrowed money. All the money that we are spending during the coronavirus pandemic is borrowed money. And that's important to understand why this is good news.
A couple of weeks ago, Treasurer, you said the quicker we get people back to work, the better. But we've got a situation right now where there are some state premiers who are continuing to close the borders despite advice from the Deputy Chief Medical Officer, Paul Kelly, that the borders should be opened, particularly here in Queensland. We've got the Premier who's dug her heels in and suggesting we may not be able to open the borders until September. That will have an enormous impact on the tourism industry here in Queensland. We're talking about hundreds of thousands of jobs.
Well, the Deputy Chief Medical Officer has said he can't see any reason why the borders should be closed, nor can we. I mean, the medical advice is not suggesting that from the Deputy Chief Medical Officer. And what we do know is that Australia has made great progress in flattening the curve. We saw the number of cases growing by more than 20% per day just a matter of weeks ago. Now that has been dramatically reduced, and we have not seen the tragic death toll that has happened in Europe and in America repeated here in Australia. That has meant we can now move to the next stage, Peter, which is the easing of the restrictions, and the National Cabinet, through the leadership of the Prime Minister Scott Morrison, has agreed to those 3 stages of the restrictions being eased. That will deliver a $9.4 billion benefit to the Australian economy each month, and it's important that we get people back into work. So when it comes to those borders being closed, that's not good news for the Queensland tourist industry. That's not good news for Queensland jobs. That's not good news for the Australian economy.
Treasurer, the Andrews government is seemingly committed to its Belt and Road policy, which is a very strong partnership with China. Now, we've seen in recent days and weeks the Chinese have imposed pretty stringent trade sanctions on this country. Do you see some sort of incongruity there where, you know, on the one hand you've got Victoria cozying up to the Chinese, and on the other hand the Chinese are coming down very hard on Australia when it comes to trade?
Well, we've set out our position very clear about an independent review, and we're pleased that motion from the Europeans got up with widespread support. We've also continued to defend Australia's national interest based on our national values, and the relationship with China is a very important economic one. Two-way trade is more than $200 billion, and Australia continues to support our exporters, and we hope that continues. But as for Victoria's decision, well, that's one for them to explain.
All right, now we've seen a AAA credit rating reaffirmed today. That's great news for the economy, great news certainly for Treasury. You also said last week that you know, there's no money tree attached to this recovery, but we've seen news poll figures suggesting that the Australian public are pretty happy with the way that you guys have handled this from an economic perspective. You must be buoyed by those figures.
Well, we've only been motivated by one thing: how to get as much support to the people who need it most. And that is what our economic packages have done, whether it's the JobKeeper program, the effective doubling of the safety net with the JobSeeker payment, the support for small businesses with the cash flow boost, the $750 payments to pensioners. It's all about getting support to those who need it most and building that bridge to the recovery phase. And that is what the Prime Minister and his team are focused on. We're really pleased with the progress we've had on the health front. That means we can now ease restrictions, and that is why we believe that Australia can come out of this a lot stronger than many other nations.
You mentioned earlier that most, if not all, of the money that's gone into the stimulus package has been borrowed. You've got, obviously, a budget coming up shortly. Do you think that, you know, as far as the payment back, are we looking at extra taxes in this budget, or do you subscribe to the theory that you can't tax your way out of this and that maybe there might be some concessions around personal income tax and company tax?
Well, there was a great contrast at the last election just over a year ago, Peter, between the two political parties. We were proposing lower taxes, which we actually legislated through the parliament, and Labor was proposing $387 billion of higher taxes, taxes which are still on their books. There is no way you can tax yourself to prosperity, and that is why we believe always in encouraging aspiration with lower taxes, and that's what we've delivered. Lower income taxes, lower taxes for small and medium-sized businesses, and just in our support packages during the coronavirus pandemic, we've provided accelerated depreciation and an extended instant asset write-off as well for businesses. So we believe in lower taxes, and that's what our record shows. When it comes to coming out of this pandemic, the way to pay back that debt is through growing the economy, and that's why we're focused on deregulation, cutting red tape. That's why we're investing in the skills agenda. That's why we're rolling out $100 billion over 10 years for our infrastructure program, and that's why we've engaged in the tax reform agenda to date as well. The economy today is 16% bigger than it was when we came to government, and so our pathway to recovery is through reform and lower taxes, not higher taxes, which is what our political opponents were proposing just on a year ago.
Some good news this week for 1,500 pub workers in Queensland. There was an identification of an anomaly in the way in which JobKeeper was being distributed to pub workers in Queensland. You've stepped in. What's the outcome of that?
Well, the good news is 1,500 workers are going to get the JobKeeper payment, and those businesses won't be disadvantaged by that quirk of the Queensland law, as you know, Peter, where there are certain rules for pub owners on one side of the border with New South Wales and other rules for those pub owners on the other side of the border in New South Wales. So there are those quirks that we're managed to work through, and I'm really pleased for those workers that they will be benefiting from the JobKeeper payment.
Mr Treasurer, before we go, you had a coughing fit in Parliament not that long ago. Obviously, you were then tested for COVID. Can I just ask you, you and the Prime Minister obviously been burning the midnight oil. The personal toll, the pressure that comes into sort of, you know, trying to get the country through such a tough and difficult and challenging time. Obviously, you know, it was great news that you didn't actually have COVID-19, but how are you bearing up under the pressure of the expectation to get us through what is obviously an enormous challenge?
Well, I'm just focused on doing my job that I was elected by the people of Kooyong to do, and I've had a great privilege to serve in the government and then to serve as the Liberal Party's Deputy Leader and as the Treasurer. So with that opportunity comes a responsibility, and we're all focused on one end, which is namely supporting the Australian people. And so, yes, there is times that you would rather be at home with your family, that you need to be away, but that comes with the job. None of us are conscripts, we're all volunteers, It is a great privilege to serve in the Australian Parliament, whatever party you represent and whatever electorate you represent or whatever state you represent. And so I'm just taking my responsibilities very seriously, and I'm really pleased with the progress that Australia has made to date on both the health and the economic front. We have the public's back. We are building that bridge to recovery, and we will get through this and be stronger than ever.
You're over the cough?
Over the cough and relishing the opportunity, obviously, to be back at the desk. And the good news, as you say, Peter, was I didn't test positive, and so therefore a few of my colleagues were sighing with relief after that.
Treasurer Josh Frydenberg, thanks for joining us tonight on Sky News Across Australia. Really appreciate it.